there, which basically revealed that the whole intelligent design movement was a response to the Supreme Court ruling out young Earth creationism and direct mentions of God. Within months after that Supreme Court decision, ID rose up. It was a PR strategy, and that's really still all it is. It's basically to insert themselves into public education because creationism is unconstitutional under the First Amendment, and also to basically get around the scientific review process by doing it through PR and through public information and through biasing the public rather than try to get their work actually vetted by the scientific community. And if you doubt me, I will do like Michael did and quote them in their own words. This is from Paul Nelson, one of his colleagues over there in Seattle. Easily the biggest challenge facing ID community is to develop a full-fledged theory of biological design. We don't have such a theory right now. That's a real problem. Without a theory, it's very hard to know where to direct your research focus. Right now, we've got a bag of powerful intuitions and a handful of notions such as irreducible complexity and specified complexity, but as yet, no general theory of biological design. Now, you tell me, is that science? It would not pass muster in any scientific community I know of. And this is from Philip Johnson, as Michael mentioned, the grandfather of the movement. I also don't think there really is a theory of intelligent design at the present time to propose as a comparable alternative to Darwinian theory, which is fully worked out scheme. There is no intelligent design theory that's comparable. No product is ready for competition in the educational world. And of course, in 2005, Judge Jones, a George W. Bush appointee in the Dover trial, agreed with these sentiments, even though they were not the sentiments of his court, and said that intelligent design is not science, and that's still where it stands legally. Thank you.
I'd like to invite the negative side now to present its case.
Do you get the feeling that Professor Prothero regards himself as an expert about facts that we don't know about? That this is essentially a debate between smart science guys who know a whole bunch of stuff and religiously motivated people who don't know anything. He threw out a whole lot of things. Tonight we're here to debate the sufficiency of evolutionary theory. We were not invited to debate the theory of intelligent design. We would happily challenge you to a direct debate about that topic some other time. But we came prepared to discuss the sufficiency of evolutionary theory, which is, in modern form, neo-Darwinism, and its idea that mutations, that natural selection acting on mutations can build fundamentally new forms of life. I want to just rebut one thing, and I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Richard Sternberg, very quickly. We've both come prepared with two scientific presentations about the sufficiency of evolutionary theory, explaining why many scientists, not just members of the ID community, are now questioning the adequacy of the mutation and selection mechanism. But just so you know, this isn't a debate about the facts. I've got Dr. Prothero's book open about the Cambrian explosion. He says it's not an explosion, it's a slow fuse. But he also says it's a series, it occurs in a series of steps, essentially a series of explosions. We don't dispute any of the things that he has on his little time chart. I'm fully aware of those. But what's important in the Cambrian explosion is that you have is the appearance of what is called evolutionary novelty, structures, anatomical structures that did not exist before. For example, the lens-focusing compound eye in the trilobite. In the Mao Shashan Formation in southern China, where we have sent researchers, there is the trilobite first appears with that complex system. It appears in a sequence of sedimentary rock, which has been dated by Samuel Bowring of MIT as having taken about 3 to 6 million years. It's true you can stretch the Cambrian out to 80 million if you want to, but to do that, you've got to count hypothetical common ancestors that haven't yet been identified. You've got to account Ediacaran fauna that do not have the distinctive morphological and anatomical features that first arise with the Cambrian phyla in the Mao Shashan Formation. So this is not a debate about the facts. It's a debate about the interpretation of the facts and the logic you use to do so. From an evolutionary point of view, it's still very important that you account for the origin of all that new form and structure in such a sudden burst of innovation and creativity lasting no more than 3 to 6 million years. Now, the debate we came to discuss tonight was the sufficiency of evolutionary theory. And I'm going to zip forward to the beginning of the presentation that we plan to make and make a point that there's a difference between observations of evolution, of change, and we've had a whole bunch we got the whole history of life there in about 20 minutes, and the cause of the changes that have been observed. Evolutionary theory attempts to explain the origin of new forms of life as a result of mutation and selection, principally. The question is that mechanism sufficient to produce all the forms of life that we see today, especially the major changes that have occurred in the history of life? Now, one of those major changes is the origin of whales from presumably land-dwelling mammalian ancestors, some deer-like creature. This is, according to Michael Shermer, one of the best examples of the Darwinian process in action. And so my colleague Richard Sternberg is going to take on this poster child of evolution in action and show that the mechanism of natural selection and random mutation is not sufficient to produce the change that is on display in the fossil record. And he's going to do that using population genetics, which is the mathematical expression of modern evolutionary theory, modern neo-Darwinian evolutionary theory. In other words, he's going to use the theory itself to show the theory's inadequacies. Richard?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Steve. I trust you can hear me well. The sequence of forms that I have above me, very close to very similar to a figure that you have in your book, Doctor. From the first impression of it is a nice transitional series, a nice progression of forms. You start out with a wolf-like or pachycetid ancestor, and then you end up with fully aquatic whales. And moreover, it's something that appeared in a well-known time frame. So you have this transition starting out from a true walking whale and ending up with a fully aquatic creature in a period of what? Roughly 9 million years. I'm taking one estimation, a monograph on Dorodon that said starting from Pachycetus, ending in Dorodon is a time frame of 9 million years. Well, the sequence that we see here, starting from a common ancestor and ending up with a derived form, is a pattern. It's a pattern to be explained. The morphing that we can imagine in our minds, in and of itself, is not a causal explanation. And you are right. What we have to do is provide testable hypotheses. And there is a testable hypothesis that has been proposed. It is that you have random mutation rates and recombination, and then you have selection coefficients, and what you get is incremental change over time, which for many people is the definition of evolution. Now, what's interesting is that in the past 2 years, several papers have been published, quite interesting papers that show that this nice progression of forms, and I don't question that progression of forms, by the way. I'm not a young Earth creationist, and I'm not an old Earth creationist, as insinuated. But that this progression of forms was rather more abrupt. Some of the sequence, for example, if you look in the middle, you've got a taxon like Gaviacetus and Protocetus and Georgiacetus. These are called protocetids, and they're depicted as having rudiments of tail flukes and reduced hind limbs, and essentially they look in between a walking whale, a terrestrial whale, if you will, and a fully aquatic whale. But what we now know is that from the skeletal evidence is that the transition took place from creatures that gave birth on land, that had well-developed pelvises, that had well-developed hind limbs, that had a sacral vertebra, to creatures that had highly reduced hind limbs, no sacral vertebrae, absent pelvises, and that gave birth in a fully aquatic environment. And moreover, if you take seriously, and I do, that this transition occurred from Pachycetus to a true marine whale in 9 million years, then this transition from these protocetids to fully aquatic whales was rather abrupt in a few million years. Now, what's interesting